After the wedding of my dreams, I thought my life was finally perfect. But one evening, I overheard a whispered conversation between my husband and my mother. The words they exchanged sent a chill through my entire body, unraveling everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my family. Subscribe to Stories Unfolded for more jaw-dropping stories of betrayal, secrets, and shocking twists. You won't believe what happens next. The weeks following my wedding felt like living in a fairy tale. The ceremony had been everything I'd ever dreamed of. White roses lining the aisle, soft music playing as I walked toward the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. Ethan, my husband, had looked at me with so much love in his eyes that I felt my heart might burst. My mother, Caroline, had been my rock throughout the wedding planning process. She had been there for every dress fitting, every cake tasting, and every little decision that had overwhelmed me. We'd always been close, but her support during those months made me feel even more grateful to have her by my side. Ethan and I had started our married life in a cozy little house on the edge of town. It wasn't grand, but it was ours, and I was eager to build a life together. He was kind, thoughtful, and always quick with a joke that could make me laugh, even on my most stressful days. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. We spent our evenings cooking dinner together, binge-watching shows, and dreaming about the future. My mother, as involved as ever, would often stop by with groceries or homemade meals, insisting that she didn't want us to go hungry while figuring out married life. I couldn't have asked for a better start to this new chapter, or so I thought. It wasn't long before I started noticing little things that felt off. Ethan would occasionally pause mid-conversation when my mother's name came up, as if he was choosing his words carefully. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was just my imagination. But then, there were the whispered phone calls. I'd walk into a room, and Ethan would quickly hang up his phone or switch the topic when I asked who he was talking to. "You're being paranoid," I told myself. "It's probably nothing." Still, the doubts lingered. One evening, I came home from work to find Ethan and my mother sitting on the couch, their heads bent together in hushed conversation. They quickly stopped talking when they saw me, plastering on smiles that felt a little too forced. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, nothing," my mother said brightly. "Just helping Ethan with a little surprise for you." "A surprise?" I said, raising an eyebrow. Ethan nodded, his smile a little too quick. "You'll see," he said. I wanted to believe them, but something about the way they looked at each other left a knot in my stomach. A few days later, I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard voices drifting up from the living room. Ethan and my mother were talking again, their tones hushed but urgent. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly crept down the stairs, stopping just out of sight. "You have to tell her," my mother was saying, her voice low but firm. "I can't," Ethan replied, his tone filled with frustration. "It'll ruin everything." "She deserves to know," my mother insisted. There was a long pause, and I held my breath, straining to hear every word. "It's too late now," Ethan finally said. "If she finds out, she'll never forgive me." My heart started pounding in my chest. What are they talking about? "You promised me," my mother said, her voice trembling. "You promised this would stay between us." "I know," Ethan said, his voice heavy. "But keeping this a secret is getting harder and harder." The knot in my stomach tightened as panic and confusion swirled in my mind. What could they possibly be hiding from me? My heart was racing as I stood frozen on the stairs, their whispered words replaying in my mind. What promise? What secret? The warmth I'd felt about my new marriage, about Ethan and my mother's close relationship, suddenly felt like a lie. Unable to stop myself, I stepped into the living room. Ethan and my mother's heads snapped toward me, their expressions a mixture of shock and guilt. "What are you two talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Ethan stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "Oh, hey, we didn't hear you come down," he said, his voice unnaturally cheerful. "I bet you didn't," I said, crossing my arms. "What's this promise you're keeping from me? What's too late now?" My mother's face paled, and she glanced at Ethan, silently urging him to say something. He avoided my gaze, his jaw tightening. "It's nothing," Ethan said finally, but his voice wavered, betraying the lie. I shook my head, taking a step closer. "Don't lie to me, Ethan. I heard you, both of you. You promised her something, and you're worried I'll never forgive you if I find out. What is it?" "Sweetheart, calm down," my mother said, her tone soothing but nervous. "It's really nothing to worry about." "Don't tell me to calm down," I snapped, glaring at both of them. "If it's nothing, then why are you hiding it? Tell me the truth, right now." Ethan sighed, sinking back onto the couch and burying his face in his hands. My mother hesitated, wringing her hands nervously. Finally, Ethan looked up at me, his expression filled with anguish. "Okay," he said quietly. "You deserve to know the truth." My breath caught as I sat down across from him, bracing myself for whatever bombshell he was about to drop. "Before I met you," Ethan began, his voice strained, I was in a really bad place. I'd lost my job, I was drowning in debt, and I didn't know how to fix it. That's when your mother—" He broke off, glancing at her nervously. "What about my mother?" I pressed, my pulse quickening. Ethan exhaled deeply. "She helped me get back on my feet. She gave me a loan to pay off my debts and get a fresh start." I blinked, trying to process his words. "What? When? How much money?" $30,000, he said quietly. "It was about a year before I met you." I turned to my mother, my mind reeling. "You gave him $30,000? Why? You didn't even know him then." My mother's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her hands. I did know him," she admitted. "We met through a mutual friend. He told me about his situation, and I wanted to help." The room seemed to tilt slightly as the pieces began to fall into place. "Wait," I said slowly, staring at Ethan. "Are you telling me you knew my mother before we met?" "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it wasn't planned, I swear. When I met you at that art gallery, it was pure coincidence. I had no idea you were her daughter." I stared at both of them, my heart pounding. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, his guilt written all over his face. "I didn't know how," he said. "At first, I thought it didn't matter. But the more serious we got, the harder it became to bring it up. And then, when we got engaged, your mom begged me not to say anything. She didn't want you to think she'd interfered in your life." My mother nodded, her expression filled with regret. "I didn't want you to feel like I'd pushed Ethan into your life, or that our relationship wasn't genuine. I only wanted to help him. I never imagined you two would end up together." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "So this whole time, you've been keeping this huge secret from me? Both of you?" "Yes," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "And I'm sorry. I hate that we lied to you. But I swear, my love for you has nothing to do with the money. I fell in love with you because of who you are, not because of what your mom did for me." I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "Do you have any idea how this makes me feel?" I said, my voice shaking. "I've spent the past few weeks thinking we had the perfect start to our marriage, and now I find out you've both been lying to me. How am I supposed to trust either of you after this?" Ethan got up and reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I know we messed up," he said desperately, "but please don't let this destroy what we have. I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." My mother stood as well, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she said. "I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was wrong. Please don't shut us out because of my mistake." For days, I wrestled with my emotions. The betrayal cut deep, but I also couldn't ignore the love I felt for Ethan, and the knowledge that my mother's actions, while misguided, had come from a place of kindness. In the end, I chose to give them a chance to make things right, but I made it clear that rebuilding my trust would take time. This experience taught me that secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, can erode the foundation of any relationship. It's a lesson in honesty, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories Unfolded. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And remember, the truth always finds its way out, so let it guide you from the start.